Welcome into the PFF podcast. Steve Palazzolo here with Sam Monson, and we are continuing our rundown memory lane history of PFF. If you haven't already caught the first couple episodes, Sam and I went through the basic history, his intro into the company and mine as well. And then last week, we interviewed the godfather of PFF, Neil Hornsby, the founder, and really some fascinating stuff from him about the early days, the evolution, Chris Collinsworth's involvement. So I do highly recommend catching those first two episodes. Today, it's Khaled and Ben, two of the early guys that came in either just before Sam. I think both of them just before you. Is that right?
No, Ben just before me. Khaled was after me, though.
Oh, okay. So you have a bit of seniority on him, though he doesn't always make it seem like that.
Tenure.
You have tenure on him, though. He's our boss, though, ultimately. So anything on these couple of characters, because like we've said in the past, it's we all have our own personalities. We all bring a little bit something different to the table.
Yeah, these are two good guys, I think, to talk to, because they're two guys that have tended to stay a little bit behind the scenes. You know, they're not as front-facing as you and me, I guess, and even Neil, who's done TV stuff and has been the guy that everyone wants to focus on when stories about PFF get written. But there's probably not two people that have been more instrumental and done more for PFF than Ben and Khaled overall. So, yeah, I think they're two great people to get their story.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, Neil mentioned both of them last week and said, you know, Neil started the grading process. Ben kind of took it to the next level. Khaled took the data collection process and many processes really to the next level. So both guys, extremely important parts in the early days of PFF and obviously a big part of the entire growth. So let's get into it right away. We're going to start with Khaled and then we'll go into Ben, and we hope you enjoy it. This is another trip rehashing the history of PFF. And now we're here with Khaled El-Sayed? El-Sayed? I don't think I've ever officially pronounced your last name.
Go with the first one, El-Sayed. That works.
Okay, I told you I'm learning a lot here on this podcast. Anyway, Khaled, we just call him K to keep it simple. The self-proclaimed most important man at PFF. I'll let him explain why that is. K, what is your official title now at PFF? Because if you're not the most important, you certainly are one of the most important people here at the company.
I think I'd say I'm the most important. I think that's a very fair statement to make on my part. I think officially I am the Vice President of Football Operations.
That does sound important. And
it sounds really important.
I've been trying to tell the listeners that I'm the most important employee here, so this is going to be an awkward interview, awkward conversation as our egos clash here. But no, I want to go back again to the early days. We've been going in reverse here. We went and discussed everything with Neil from his perspective, and you were one of the guys in the early days. So let's go back. Early days of PFF. How did you get involved? How did you get involved with Neil? What were those? And what was the year? What year were you first involved here?
So the year I was first involved would have been during the 2008 season. So probably just after the Super Bowl there. Like a lot of stories, it starts with a girl who somehow managed to dump me. I mean, You've met me. It's quite hard to imagine someone dumping me. But
you're an attractive young man, yes.
I'm not young, but I'm definitely attractive.
At the time, we're a young man.
At the time, not so much now. The hairline's gone a few inches backwards. But yeah, I was kind of at this crossroads in life where I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So at the time, PFF was just a really good way to kind of occupy myself. And as Neil alluded to in his chat last week, I started off and I did an Atlanta Falcons game, and about 3 plays in, I just couldn't tell the difference between Harry Douglas and Lauren Robinson. And I thought, this just isn't for me. This is impossible. Can't do this. So I went away. I did a bit of traveling, or failed traveling as my friends and family call it. Went to Australia, came back with kind of a renewed sense of self-purpose. Figured I'll give this a go. And then from there, it's just kind of grown. So I think in the 2008 season, I probably did about 40, 50 games. 2009 season, I probably ended up doing about 120, 130 games while working a full-time job.
Wow.
And yeah, it was this fantastic tool for me to get involved with PFF because obviously I love football. and it gave me a sense of purpose, because what I was doing was building something that I was really invested in, really loved, and really believed in.
So you actually are one of those few success stories, the guy that kind of left, found himself, you were a quitter, and you came back and things were better. You don't hear those success stories too much. Usually people go and find themselves and they never come back.
Yeah, well, I think I tried to escape from reality for a little bit, but I realized I just had to get on with things. I wasn't getting any younger. I think I was 24 at the time, figure out how old I am now. And it was just a case of I wanted to do something meaningful with my life. I'd done jobs previously. I spent 2.5 years working in kind of headhunting for investment banks. And I wanted to do a job that, one, I was good at, and two, that meant something to me. And while PFF didn't start off offering a job because there was no pay involved,
right,
it did grow into something that obviously now provides a nice little income for me and my family.
Yeah, so it is a fun story. So let's get into some of the stuff that you do, because again, you're the self-proclaimed most important person at PFF, and sometimes it's hard to argue that because you kind of control the whole thing, the databases, the structure. I don't know how many people essentially work under you at this point. How would you describe some of the day-to-day now, and then how has that really evolved through the years?
Well, it used to be, I think in the 2011 season, maybe 2010 a bit, I started to become Neil's kind of right-hand man. He didn't really have the bandwidth to manage everything, so it just made sense that somebody else would do it. And Ben obviously was focused with analysis. Ian's a tech guy who you wouldn't want anywhere near football stuff.
No, not at all.
And Sam was doing some other stuff as well. So really, I was the kind of workaholic guy who had nothing better to do with his life. So I would just consume myself with anything PFF related would occupy my free time. I was a really bad case in that respect, but I thought I was building something, so I just really invested in it. And it started initially, I was managing the database, so every member of staff, they get sent files, and then the files have to get sent back to me, and I'd put them in the system, and then I'd get it up on the site, clean all the data, check all the data against other sources to make sure the data is accurate, check our own data against people within the company doing kind of what we call dedupe copies. It was really just a case of being responsible for the data. So anything was wrong with the data, I get a call from Neil saying, this isn't right. Normally with a few expletives, kind of pass the expletives on to someone like yourself, and everything would be hunky-dory.
Yeah, that's a fascinating process. We have been asking everyone here, and I think your relationship with Neil might be a little bit different, but I've been trying to ask everybody, when you're on Skype and you see the words Neil Hornsby is calling, what is the first thing that goes through your mind? Now, I understand you guys do have like a daily call or something, right? Anyway, I mean, you guys are... I mean, my mom used to talk to her mom every single morning. I feel like you guys have a similar relationship. But when the unscheduled call comes in, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
What does he want?
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. Because he wants something, and it's what does he want? Like, just before this podcast started, and thankfully you got me out of it, but I got a call from him, and I was like, Neil, can't do it, podcasting. But he's going to want something. But, yeah, the relationship with Neil is an interesting one. And don't tell him this, hopefully he doesn't listen, but he's definitely turned into one of the most important people in my life. Kind of transcends relationship kind of categories. So I'm very fortunate to have met Neil, but not as fortunate as he was to meet me.
Well, I'm glad that you didn't get off-brand too much, because it started to get a little soft there, but you did reel it back in to...
I have to say something nice about him, because he dictates my pay, so if I'm not nice about him, then... I'm not going to do very well for myself.
Your motivation is certainly in the right spot, but he describes himself as, and I don't know if you got to hear it, and by the way, he just downloaded iTunes just so he could listen to the podcast, so he will be listening, and I'm sure he'll phone you up and thank you for that, but he described his managerial style. I asked him, any NFL coach, he said Mike Zimmer, a little bit of emotion, not always a player's coach, but we're always moving forward, that type of thing. Is that about fair for Neil and his managerial style?
I mean, there's a lot of emotion.
Yes, a lot of emotion.
It's always 100%. I think it's unrelenting in a really good way, because it kind of pushes things on. Obviously, I'm probably a little bit more measured and diplomatic about how I go about things. And Neil can sometimes be a bit of a bull in a china shop, but in a really good way, because without that, PFF wouldn't have pushed forward, because he's been the one that's driven stuff, especially from an external point of view, just by having that kind of sheer force of personality.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's been many times throughout the company where, we'd come out of the NFL Combine, and I'm with Neil for the entire week or whatever it is, and he is so gung-ho on something, whatever it might be, and we're all excited, and then, like we have a Monday morning call, and you've just completely tempered expectations, just brought him off the ledge and was like, no, that's probably not the best idea. So you are kind of that voice of reason with him, but I think that's that meshing of personalities is really what has made us work as a company, because Neil certainly has his strengths that have moved us forward. You have as well, and other people have as well. I think everybody at PFF has some level of just OCD when it comes to, something, whether it's Nate and his ability and player participation and
keystrokes.
Yeah, saving every last keystroke, and Ben obviously is extremely process oriented when it comes to analysis. How would you say you are with your attention to detail in all of these processes?
I'm probably not as detail orientated as, say, someone like Neil, which is why everything takes Neil about 5 times longer than it would take a normal human being, because he's so attention to detail orientated. But I think I'm very efficient with my time and what I do. So kind of work at the 80-20 rule of putting the kind of most effort in to get the maximum returns without kind of doing the stuff that you don't get any returns for. So that's probably why I ended up taking over some of those processes, because especially in those early days when we didn't have many members of staff, you really needed to turn stuff around quickly and be able to fix things on the fly.
Right.
So that's probably something that I excelled at a little bit.
So I've been telling people this podcast, it's not just for football fans or people that have followed PFF, but I do think it's, if you're into business, or if you, just as far as like picking up tips for business and stuff like that, listening to Neil talk and you and Ben and some of the other guys talk, I mean, there's a lot, I think, to capture in all of this. How would you say, so the early days, you started managing some processes. You were actually the first person I spoke to at PFF after I sent my email that said, "Do you need help?" ? And you were the one who emailed me back, said, "Yes, we're always looking for help. Let's set up a Skype call." And we set up a Skype call, and I hear your accent, and I'm just like, oh boy, what? I had no idea that Pro Football Focus was overseas and all this stuff. But, how have you seen PFF grow from a perception standpoint, a respect standpoint? And I asked Sam this, the early days of, who are these people, to now we've got 27 NFL teams, closing in on even more, 20 college teams. How have you seen that whole process grow through the years? It's
been incredible, because I think when you get involved with it, you don't necessarily expect to be where we are today. I certainly didn't. And I know Neil, initially, the plan was never to make money and grow a huge business out of this. It was always just to do something we loved. We always felt that we'd never be able to cross that divide to working alongside these people who we've admired for so long. So initially, in those kind of first few years, any kind of exposure we got was a massive deal. It was like, oh my God, there's a Google search and we've got a response. Someone said something about us today. This is great. And obviously now we're a bit more well known. You don't tend to do the Google search on PFF because you don't need to, because you're normally informed by Twitter about what's going on.
Usually people complaining about the grades or something, but yeah, there's always.
It happens once or twice. It's happened once or twice.
I like to think that the satisfied customers just kind of keep to themselves and don't tell you how awesome you are.
Exactly. And I imagine there's thousands of those, hundreds of thousands even.
Yeah.
But generally over the years, and the more, especially since Chris has got involved as well, because Chris has just brought with him an air of credibility, because why would he invest in something that wasn't legitimate? So definitely the last 3 years there's been a huge growth in terms of when you speak to NFL people, whether it be at the combine or whether it's just on a phone conversation or anything like that. There's a level of respect there that just wasn't there initially. There's no way you can kind of skirt around that. Initially, we weren't very respected. There wasn't much faith in what we did, but as we've explained our processes, explained our grading structures, how we collect stuff, how we audit stuff, they bought into it.
Yeah, there's been very few conversations with either NFL head coaches, general managers, former general managers that have gone sour that I've been a part of, where somebody said, "No, you guys are just full of it, and this is useless." There's one that comes to mind that I've been a part of, but that's pretty much it. And the person that was not receptive to it is not receptive to most other humans in general, anyway. So that's
enough
a different
said
story.
about that.
But that's a different story.
Yeah, and it's not that people are going to agree with everything we do,
right,
or everything that we put out. But I think when you look at the processes and you see how much work goes into it, you see the outputs and how they so often align with what NFL people are saying. You have to respect what goes into that, and I think they do.
Yeah, that's exactly where I am. Again, very few meetings where people didn't, at least by the end of it, respect the process, respect the work. And that's people who came in really not knowing who was doing this stuff, who was in charge of it, and why people that had never been in the NFL or how they could possibly do it, but at the end said, wow, that I respect that, or I at least see where you guys are coming from. Again, so you mentioned you manage so many different processes. Chris comes in 2014. On our very first call, okay, when you were hiring me, in my classic fashion, I hadn't even been hired yet, and I think I was already talking about, hey, let's do college down the road. And in your classic fashion, you're like, all right, dude, just take a step back, one step at a time here. Why don't you get some player participation under your belt doing the NFL? But again, that's how our personalities match. I'm 5 years ahead, and you're process-oriented and saying, okay, one step at a time. But
well, you're a dreamer, I live in reality. It's kind of a perspective thing there.
Again, but that's what makes us work, man. That's what makes us work. I'm going to come up with some great ideas for you later today that you can dismiss again. But, we finally got to experience the reality of doing college starting in 2014. And, of course, you spearheaded that whole process as far as managing it and creating a database. And I don't think people realize how much work goes in to just adding this new process, especially for someone like you who has never even watched a college football game. Is that right? Up until that point?
I think I watched one college football game up until that point.
So you came from just no concept of anything. This is like Neil teaching Ian how to watch football or about football. So you had no concept of college football, no interest in it. We had done some trial runs. I mean, we were starting to get prepared. 2013, we all started grading some games and figuring out, if we do need to, get video for all these games, what's that process going to be look like? What's it going to look like? But you pulled it all together in 2014. What was that whole thing like? Essentially saying, here's the NFL. We think we have that mastered from a data collection standpoint. Now multiply it by 4. Let's do college.
That was hard, man. That was really hard.
No
and
sleep.
I'd be remiss to say that I'd spoken to Ben and Sam about it probably in 2009 season, and between us come to the conclusion that we can't do this. Because at the time we wasn't getting paid, and the logistics of it just seemed impractical. But obviously you came along, and for I think your first 3 years with the company, every other conversation was, why don't we do college? Why don't we do college? It's like, Steve, will you just shut up? We know we want to do it, but so you were just putting a little bit of pressure on. And I remember it because it was during the 2013 season, and over in the UK, obviously there's a time difference, so I'd wake up early on a Friday morning to do the Thursday night game. And I'd done player participation or analysis on the Thursday night game, and then I was kind of done. I was like, well, I've got no work to do, and I don't really want to spend time with my girlfriend this weekend because she'll make me go and look at dresses or something like that.
That's the spirit.
So from there, I had the TV on, and they were showing a rerun of, I think it was Stanford, Oregon in the 2013 season. And I just thought, well, it'd be cool to try this. And I think that Friday morning I spoke to you, and I spoke to Ian, our CTO. And for the rest of the day, I was just trying to bastardize our system we had at the moment to get that to work. And I started thinking to myself, we could make this happen. I kept sending you files to check, see if it was working, and it wouldn't work. And about 2 weeks later, after giving up any free time I had and trying to delegate all my other tasks to people, we had a working database, and that was kind of the first step. And for the next kind of 4 months, myself, Ian, and you, because I needed you to kind of guide me in terms of rosters and all sorts of things like that, we just worked to make this happen, to put us in the position that we could potentially do it. And obviously before the season, before Chris's involvement, we thought, maybe we'll do one conference, maybe we'll do the SEC. And then Chris got involved, and all of a sudden it was like, right, 870 games, go. And that was tough, because at the start of the season, Neil was out in the States kind of putting the final touches to the deal, so kind of running the company in his absence because he had to sort the deal out. My wife was away on holiday. I just remember during pre-season just getting no sleep whatsoever because of the way I had to send files out and then be awake 2 hours later to send more files out. So that was easily the hardest period of my time with PFF, because for those kind of 2-3 weeks I was maybe getting 3 hours sleep a day. but it was to see it come to fruition, to see like the college grades come to fruition. It was huge for you as well to see it. I think we did the first game, Abilene Christian against Georgia, or
Never
Georgia
forget
State.
it.
Yeah. And it was like, we've done it. This is amazing. And then we realized there was 100 things wrong with it, and we had to redo other stuff. That first season was really tough, but so rewarding. And the impact that we're able to have now on the draft in terms of helping NFL teams, raising awareness of prospects, and obviously, and I don't want to praise you too much, but you've kind of pioneered what we're doing on that front. It's been great to see it because it just feels like we're having a positive impact on football.
Well, I appreciate it, Kay. And obviously, the heart, it doesn't. So again, this stuff doesn't happen if you don't have very specific skill sets. I could never do what you do from a process standpoint and being able to put all of that together. So it was a fun process. 2014, I think, will go down in history as the most challenging season in PFF history. I mean, we set a deadline of finishing every college game by the Super Bowl, and we were a little behind by January 1st. So it was all hands on deck for the entire month of January, but we got it done. You mentioned preseason. When we added preseason in 2013, it sounded like a simple task until you actually go through it. I think preseason's even more difficult than the regular season just because the games are so spread out and there's very little break. But I think that's been part of the evolution of PFF. We started with the NFL, we added preseason, we added college. High school's now on the horizon. Are you going to be a big part of whatever it is we're doing at the high school level? And I don't know, again, if you heard Neil's podcast, he said we're just going to do every college game sooner rather than later, or every high school game sooner rather than later, by the way. And you know what happens when you tell Neil he can't do something.
Yeah, I mean, he put the proposal on my desk last year. And I was like, oh, let's just do a little sampling of stuff. So we did about 40 games last year, and it was interesting because you run into different challenges that you don't run into with a college game or the NFL level. So it was interesting to understand those. But as we were kind of doing it and discussing it, you realise, you know what, this is a lot more possible than we thought it was. I will be a big part of it. I'll probably run that process. And it's great because the idea to me that we're able to watch a player from high school through to his last snap in the NFL, to see that progression, to kind of be involved in that journey with them, maybe discover some players who kind of get missed by some of the recruiters. That's very exciting.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how this one plays out. I mean, with college, we really did just jump in and say, okay, we're doing every FBS game. I think we're realistic enough to know in high school we have to start in chunks and how we split that up. And, you know, we've already gotten unbelievable feedback from high schools around the nation saying this would be a value, and colleges saying this would be a value. So, you know, still a lot more to come on that end. I have to ask you now, because early days of PFF versus now, it is funny how we've all evolved. I met you in 2011 when you first hired me. None of us had kids, and now we all have kids, and we're dads, and we're old, in our 30s, and all that stuff. So how has fatherhood softened your managerial style? I know you've become a big softie over the years. You like to play up this hard image over Skype, but how have you softened up now that you're a dad?
Well, I've always thought of you all as my children in some respects. I don't know if I have softened up. I've always looked after you and done right by you, provided for you. I think you'd probably agree deep down that I'm kind of that father figure you've always wanted.
So the way you look to Neil, you then pass off that tough love to us. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, pretty much.
I think that's fair.
It does change you. I mean, anyone who says fatherhood doesn't change you is just lying, because it gives you this greater sense of responsibility that just wasn't there before. So, and especially a level of empathy with some of our other guys who have already had children and some of the kind of issues they run into as well that you couldn't maybe comprehend before. It gives you a better understanding of that.
Yeah, it's different now because, you know, a few years ago, like you said, you were sleeping 3 hours a night and knee-deep in databases. Now you're snuggling and changing diapers and everything. You've softened up over the years. But luckily, you still get all your work done, right? You're still as efficient as ever.
Well, I don't need to be as hard as I was previously. Like, we've got more resource now. And people are better at their jobs. So they understand what they have to do more. And I'm part of that number as well. I'm better at what I do. Before I was a little bit more kind of aggressive and blunt because I was so desperate to get stuff done. Whereas now I'm a bit better at understanding what I need to do to get the results I want. So it's just, we've all grown into better employees, which requires less management and less of those kind of tough love chats. So it's as much as your development, Steve, as my own inner development. I'm such a nice person nowadays.
It all stems from you again. One last thing about managing this massive team. When you hired me back in 2011, I was one of 15 part-timers doing player participation. At the time, there was 4 full-timers, I believe. Nate and I have a debate who was the real 5th full-time employee. He tried to tell me the other day that he was number 5. I've claimed that I'm number 5, but that's irrelevant. At the time, there was less than 20 people really involved in the company. Now we're at how many, including all of our part-time?
Well, just to correct you, because I always love to correct someone, really puts them in the place, makes them feel more powerful. When you joined, there was only 1 full-time member of staff. I think you joined about 2 weeks before Ben was made a full-timer and about a month before Sam was made a full-timer.
Oh, wow.
Because we just didn't have the funds to pay them full-time, but obviously we generated that, and in those early days, every penny we made went straight back into staffing. Neil was very good about that. But we've gone from having kind of like 15, 20 then, to now we've got, I'd say, about 240 part-timers. I probably manage about 35 full-timers, maybe 40. It's a number now where you just don't keep track of it, because why would you? So it's definitely grown in terms of numbers and people to manage. And over the last kind of 6 weeks, it is hard to build a relationship with everyone. But I've been able to speak to a lot of our part-timers, and just it's so infusing to speak to them, to see that same level of motivation and investment in getting involved in PFF that I had kind of 9 years ago. It's really contagious, and to kind of present that opportunity to people to work in the football industry in a way that, I mean, you and I probably never thought it possible before PFF came along, but we've got that platform now, and if they work hard, there's full-time jobs there at the end of it, and they get to kind of live the dream that we're kind of living, which is spending a lot of time watching football and really investing in that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is always nice to have that reminder too, that, because 2011 for me and 2008 for you is a long time ago. Just having that reminder of what it was like to kind of be, at the beginning. And those 200 something guys that we have working part-time came through thousands and thousands of applications that we have. And in our applications, we're not looking at your resume or anything. It's just do this data collection really well, bring something to the table, and work hard and get a lot of work done and get it done accurately. And that's what I always tell guys. That's the biggest way to turn heads around here. When you compliment someone, Kay, it's usually this guy works hard, he's timely, and he's accurate. And I think as Neil said, Neil's done a really good job. The one thing that he's definitely done a good job of is kind of setting the groundwork, setting that tone for the type of people that we're trying to bring into the company. So now we have hundreds of them, and even more opportunities for those guys to move up as we grow.
Exactly.
So now you've been here since the early days. I got to go back. There's a couple fun stories through the years. Okay. I know that a player, well, let me ask you, has a player ever threatened your life through the years?
Just once.
Just once. Without naming names. Unless
I'm not going to name names because
he's probably
like most players. He's a lot bigger than me, and if he found me, he could probably do a lot of damage.
He's probably one of our millions of listeners. But how did that all go down?
I was working on Christmas Day, because at the time we had to work on Christmas Day because that's when our clients needed the data. So I got an email on Christmas Day, Christmas morning my time. So it had been like 7 a.m. my time, 2 a.m. your time. And just this player just threatening to come to my country and throw me off, I think, London Bridge or something like that.
That's unbelievable.
Because I'd written something, which in fairness, it wasn't the nicest thing I'd ever written about someone. Probably not a justified reaction on his part.
We certainly weren't shy in the early days of stating our case. Here's what the grades say, and take it or leave it. We
didn't have the time to be diplomatic then. We weren't as reasoned because we were also stressed with the amount of work we had to produce.
Yeah, and you as you mentioned, you're sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night. Maybe you made up a bunch of stuff about the guy, and he had reason to threaten you. I don't know.
No, I didn't.
No, you didn't. The grades usually stand for themselves.
Yeah.
So that's a fun one. The other fun one, I'm going to ask Ben later. We had a now infamous call because the PFF 101, which actually we're going to have a call today to discuss the PFF
It's my
101.
baby. It's my baby. I created that back in 2010.
Well, let me ask you real quick. There's a story behind it being the 101 now too, right? Because I was going to ask this, but why is it 101?
So, well, essentially, it was initially designed as just my list because I had some free time, nothing better to do, and it was the top 100 players. But because we didn't have the kind of editorial oversight that we do now, and because my colleagues hadn't vetted me very well, I forgot Vince Wilfork.
Oh, can't forget Vince.
So I had to, and he had a good year. So I had to find a room for him, and I put him in where he deserved to, and I just pushed everyone down one. And then it became the top 101, and it's obviously in 2011 I gave up control over it, so to a group of senior analysts, myself included, and it became a consensus-based thing. And I think it's a lot better in 2011 to today than it was in 2010 when it was just me doing it.
Well, I do love your contribution making it a 101, and I do love that we've stuck with it. You know, it's one extra player than the NFL, and it's kind of our thing now. And you know,
happy accident.
Go ahead.
It's a happy accident.
A happy accident. I like it. I mean, and that's our thing. And for people that don't know, when we put this list together, it's not simply taking the PFF grades and just listing them top to bottom and saying, okay, here's your top 101. We try to add a little context to it and say, okay, you know, this guy had a 90 grade, this guy had a 90 grade, but, you know, this guy's job was a little bit more difficult. And we try to treat all positions as equally as possible. We take snap count and workload and usage and all these things into consideration, which leads to some marathon calls where we're debating players. Now, the most famous of those calls, or infamous of those calls, was, I believe it was 2012, the debate for the last spot, the spot that shouldn't even have existed unless you made your happy mistake, which was Marcel Reese, who I believe you fought tooth and nail for to get him at number 101 in the 2012 list. Can you explain your case or give your case for Marcel Reese and why he should have been included? No, you did not want him in. I'm sorry.
I did not want him in. I hopefully he's not listening. He's a very good player and he's a special weapon, but he's a fullback. And I was adamant that if I wanted a fullback on my list, I wanted someone who was one of the best lead blockers. So I thought this guy he could run the ball. He was a very good receiver out of the backfield, or if you line him up, split out. And he was a decent lead blocker. But all those things combined, wouldn't see him have the impact of somebody else. So, yeah, I think Ben and I took very opposing views on this. And like Ben's a really good friend of mine. He came to my wedding, came to my stag do, and all that stuff. And he's not a timid person, but he's not someone who swears a lot. He's not someone who gets worked up a lot. I, on the other hand, can at times be a little bit sweary.
A little bit sweary.
I think the conversation got a little bit heated. I think we both needed to take 10, 15 minutes to ourselves afterwards.
Yeah, you don't get the same effect of like the phone hanging up or clicking when you're over Skype, but when the voices elevate, there's cussing going back and forth. Well, on your end at least, it was pretty heated. And this was after hours and hours and hours of debating the top 100 players in the NFL, and we were just so close to the end. We just wanted to figure out number 101, and you guys couldn't let it go. But it was.
I think we had fatigue. We had 101 fatigue going on. I think by that stage we all hated each other so much that something was bound to blow, and this was the last chance to kind of vent all that anger out. And vent we did.
And if you guys go back and look at, I'm pretty sure it was 2012. If you guys go back and look, Marcel Reese did not make it into the top 101. So
you should know who the power lies over there. Take that, Ben.
I think you went and cried to Neil about it, but that's a different story. We made the adjustment the next year. We said we're going to split this call into 2 different days worth of calls, because we simply can't deal with 101 fatigue any longer. No. But again, one of those internal stories that we've always had fun with. We still joke to this day about the Marcel Reese call and the incident, as we like to call it. Is there something, if you want, can you just sum up real quick? I mean, we've touched on a lot of different stuff. Sum up your journey at PFF or anything else that you think that the fans need to know or should know as far as where we are now, where we're going for the future, and just PFF as a whole.
PFF for me has been about building something, and we haven't finished building what we want to build. It's grown a lot quicker than I think any of us imagined, And with that, it's just presenting this opportunities to so many people. And for me, who's heavily involved in all the staffing issues, it's great that we're going to be able to present this opportunity for people who really want to get involved in football. Not people who say they do, but then don't want to put in the hard work. But people who want to job in football, want to work hard, contribute to something, to be able to be the company that offers that. I just think we live in a kind of world where if you can provide opportunity to people, you're doing the greatest thing possible. And if you can do something you love at the same time, yeah, it's one of the reasons PFF means so much to me. It's like a kid of my own. That's how much it means to me. And we're only going to keep growing. You've obviously mentioned high school and stuff like that. And it's just a very exciting future. So I'm very grateful for PFF, and I hope other people are as well.
Well, you do sound like a proud papa, and and you should, because you've been a key part of watching it grow, and we'll be there to continue to watch it grow. And that's the last nice thing I'll say about you right now. That's Khaled El Said, which I learned how to officially pronounce his name, according to him, just today. And that's what the PFF podcast is all about. We're here to continue to learn. We're digging back into the past at PFF and how we grew and all of the cast of characters that help us grow. So thanks to Khaled for taking the time to build PFF to this point and to continue to build it in the future.
Thanks for having me on, Steve.
So that's my interview with Khaled. We're going to bring in Ben Stockwell now, who I call the architect of the PFF grading system. Here with Ben Stockwell, I'm going to call him the architect of the PFF system because he doesn't get credit, I don't think, for creating it necessarily. It was Neil's baby initially, throwing his pluses and minuses around, but Ben is the one who shaped the system through the years, through its many iterations. So Ben, what's your official title now?
I am the Director of Analysis.
So the Director of Analysis, we'll get into what that means and everything that, Ben has been throughout his time at PFF. But yes, he's the one who I think essentially took the PFF system to the next level. Is that a fair assessment, Ben?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Neil definitely created the system, but I made it my own, documented it, and have evolved it and taught it to everybody else. So it's Neil's by creation, but I've kind of adopted it, made it my own, and taken it to where it is now.
And you're also the one who has the pleasure of every time I have a genius idea, hey, we should do this, you have to listen to me, right? That's also part of your job description?
I do. That's part of my job description. I have to listen to all of your harebrained ideas. I believe it's part of our constant improvements within PFF. So nice. All the ideas from Steve, from Zach Robinson on the quarterback front, from Bobby Slowick, who's now with the 49ers on the defensive front, all the ideas for evolution that people come up with, they come to me, and I either say that's a great idea or, Steve, no, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah, we're hit or miss with Steve's ideas, but I like to think I've had a hand in helping you shape the system through the years, and you've become much more political over the years, Ben. I appreciate the nice political answer, giving a little bit of credit away, because there was a time when you wanted the whole system to your own. You said, that's it, I'm doing every game by myself. I don't want anyone else to do it with me. Is that right? And you probably did. Didn't you do every single game in 2009 anyway? Or 2008?
Not quite. I think I did. I think of the 267 games in the regular season and the playoffs, I think I did 190 of them, possibly 200.
You are an absolute machine. We'll get into that as well, but let's back up a little bit. We talked to Neil on the last podcast about, and when we talked to Sam about the chat room and kind of how you guys all got together. Give me your take on that. How did that all come about? How did Neil approach you, and how do you, Ben Stockwell, with just out of college, how are you the one that has essentially, like I said, shaped this player evaluation system that I think has really taken over football at all levels?
So how it started out, Sam covered it very perfectly with the message board. Sam's Trojan horse entry into the second iteration of the message board was a crucial phase of that, I think. But yeah, I mean, I graduated from University of East Anglia in England with a degree in ecology, and I've put that to really good use with being a football analyst and directing the PFF process. Didn't have a job when I graduated. Neil was obviously trying to get this project off the ground, and it was just a right place, right time kind of deal on that front. I had the time availability that Neil wanted to be able to put into it to try and get games churning through it. So I did my first game with Neil in 2006 when I was still at university, but started up properly in 2007. We did half of the 2007 season, which we've since wiped away and gone back and done the entire thing in the 2013 and 14 off seasons, and then we started in doing the full seasons from 2008, which took me until a week before the 2009 season started. So that was kind of my route in. I did it with two other analysts who are no longer with the company and haven't been for some time. It was me, Neil, someone called Steve Wright, who has actually moved to Kansas, and someone who I only know by their message board username, who is Sedge, who is I believe he's a mental health doctor in Northern Ireland now. So that's the crew that did the first season of first full season of PFF grades in 2008.
And obviously you were not only the most dedicated of the group, certainly the best analyst of the group. Is that right?
Naturally.
Of course. Now, when I joined the company in 2011, I was just doing player participation. We essentially had 4 people doing the grading. At that time, or at your peak, how many games were you doing in, say, a 24-hour stretch? Because, we'd all start work on games. We couldn't start until the game finished in our old system. We've now changed that. But we couldn't start until the game finished. So Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern, which is 9 p.m. over in the UK. Did you get a start right away? Did you wake up early on a Monday morning? And what was your workload like at its peak during Sunday, Monday?
I think the most I ever did within we'll call it a 24-hour period after the first game's finished, sort of 9 p.m. for me in the UK on Sunday until midnight, end of Monday, I would do, I think the most I ever did was 5 games, but usually it was 3 and a half, 4 games. So I would do half a game Sunday night before I went to bed, wake up bright and early, 5 a.m. Monday morning, rattle through the second half of that game, and then 3 more games on top of that. And then I would do Monday Night Football on the Tuesday morning as well. So that was at its peak. That was my workload. And then the peak on top of that, I would then do, as you explained in the first podcast, I'd do a B copy player participation game on a Tuesday afternoon, which both due to my PP skills and the amount of work that I'd done beforehand wasn't necessarily my best work.
I'm sensing a theme here. A lot of the people that have moved on in the company or moved up in the company, Neil included, Rick, who we'll talk to, you guys are bad at PP. You guys are setting a bad example for our hundreds of PP analysts who, nowadays you have to be good to continue to progress, but you guys kind of like bucked the trend. Good thing you could do something else.
See, because you see the new guys they've got the benefit of the tutelage from people like Nathan to memorize shoe combinations and wristband combinations. I was trying to look at the numbers, that's just a path to failure in player participation. Yeah, don't be looking at the numbers. Numbers lie.
Theme the last few weeks. Do not look at numbers. There are better ways to identify players. So you were the top analyst. You're the guy, still one of the top analysts. I think I'm up there, right there with you. Mike Renner, the young buck on your heels. I think we're right up there as far as analysts go, but that's another debate for another day. But how has your role changed, progressed through the years, and how has the system progressed through the years as far as, you mentioned some of the other insight we've gotten from Zach Robinson, my podcast partner on the Quarterback podcast, Bobby Slowick, who you mentioned, San Francisco 49ers coach, and of course the very many NFL coaches that work with us, both whether it's Gunther Cunningham, fully on board with PFF, the Pro Coaches Network, who we do a lot of work with. So how has the system progressed? How has your role progressed and changed throughout the years?
I mean, the progression of the system is anytime we get constructive feedback. You mentioned Pro Coach Network. We actually have meetings with them in our Cincinnati offices at the end of last week, last Thursday and Friday. anytime we get constructive feedback on how we're grading games, be that from people within the company, partners, client teams, suggesting that we're off base on certain things, we go back and we reevaluate and we adjust as we need. I'm never going to sit here and say that the system is perfect. I don't think you can ever get to a perfect system because you've got teams playing in different ways. So you have to find a way to address the system to certain concepts and then understand how to adjust that to how teams are running it. So that the system is as settled as it can be, but it's never going to be in a position where it's like, right, we're done. We're never going to adjust anything that we're doing here, because every single off season, a team comes up with a new wrinkle, and if it's successful, that gets copied. So you've constantly got to be playing catch up. In terms of my role has evolved from essentially being lead analyst to now being lead analyst and director of analysis. So I've just picked up from being the person who does the most gains, who's lent on for the majority of the analysis, to put someone who's lent on for a lot of the analysis, and trying to keep what is currently 25 other analysts in check and in line to make sure that the variance between individuals is as limited as possible.
So that leads us into one of our Twitter questions, because someone did ask, and we get this all the time, how different is it from analyst to analyst as far as quality and consistency? And can you just explain quickly the steps that we take to essentially mitigate those? Obviously, each analyst is at slightly different levels of ability. Like I said, I'm the best analyst now, and everyone else takes a back seat. But, we all have slightly different levels of ability, but we have some checks in place to kind of tie all that together.
It's definitely the humility of the analyst that, sets out the level that they're at. So,
of course, only in jest. I'm not really the best analyst. I'm in probably the top 5%er, though. Yeah, I'd say.
So, I mean,
humbly,
at its base level, we are humans grading other humans. Football is not played in a vacuum, and football is not analyzed in a vacuum. So there is going to be natural variance between the graders. The way that we try and limit that is, my job is not simply an in-season execution of our grading system. We take full advantage of the off-season to spend as much time going over the same plays as the other analysts, setting exercises. Let's have a look at these outside zone plays. Let's have a look at how the receiver and the quarterback and the defender are playing this deep ball. Try and remove the variance in is it a great throw by the quarterback throwing the receiver open, or is it a throw that's forcing the receiver to play through the defender, and how we grade those. So constantly just working together to get as close as possible. And then in the execution of the grading, it's not simply a case of, right, Steve, go away and grade Atlanta or Oakland, and that's that done. We have a second review process. So we do the initial run of broadcast, we then regrade it on all 22. So we have a second grader to come in, tighten everything up again, and then we have a third process where we apply ProCoach Network's grades to our grades and check for variance within there as well. So we've got many sets of eyes going over the grades. It's not simply a case of let 25 analysts loose and never check on their work. We're constantly checking through and making sure that the system is being applied in the correct way, with still some leeway for individual, at least, questions to come up and say, I don't think we're quite grading this run concept correctly, or I don't think we've quite got the quarterback's positioning on this kind of drop back correct. Let's adjust this and continue to improve it for the next season and for the next week.
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about on the previous podcast were the Skype chats, and we have multiple Skype chats going just for the grading process itself. One that has all of the graders in there where, anytime during the week, Ben, you could say, hey guys, look at this play, and take note of how you would grade, say, the right tackle on this particular play, the way when he does this. And as far as in season the checks go, we have open dialogue throughout games, throughout the review process. Hey, everybody, can you guys check out this throw? And there's a few of the senior analysts that will be in certain chats where we'll look at very specific things together and make sure that we're on the same page. So I think the answer to that question is, is there some variance? Yeah, like you said, there's that human element, but as the review process unfolds, that all gets really, really tied together. And anything that is a grayer area, so to speak, we get more opinions, and we get more of our more senior people in there to kind of make that final read. So
for sure, and
pretty good about it.
And as the analysis team grows, as it's going to again this season, we've got a selection of outstanding candidates training in our analysis program at the moment. As that grows, the ability for people to specialize comes in, which we're going to be able to enact for the first time this year, where obviously we've got Zach Robinson joining us full-time this season, and we're going to be in a position where I don't have to say to Zach on game days and the days following game days where we're reviewing the grades, I'm not going to say to Zach, go away and do a whole game, where I'm going to be wasting his specialist skill on quarterbacks and receivers to assess how well is this defensive tackle playing his gap in run defense. I'm able to throw as much of the passing game at Zach as possible and say, hey, make sure everybody's on the same page on this, make sure we're grading this as accurately as possible. And the more the company grows, the more the analysis team grows, the more we're going to be able to get into specialization like that while maintaining the company ethos of, at its core, this is an adversarial system, so you do need to be able to grade both sides of the ball. We're never going to get to the point where we have an offensive grader and a defensive grader and their thinking doesn't match up. We're always going to bring it back to the same point where we have people on the same page for the offensive and defensive side of the ball.
Man, that's something. I thought I was only going to get you for about 10 to 15 minutes, but the more you talk about the system, I always love kind of diving into as many of the details as we can give away. But that's one of those things that I think really separates us, because we've sat down with so many offensive line coaches, defensive coaches, and offense and defense, you truly see the game a little bit differently. As an offensive line coach, you say, look, I'm expecting this guy to make this block, and you're only kind of seeing it from the offensive point of view. And we might be saying, look, we need to see it from both points of view. What looks like a good block is really that defensive player is doing his job as well. He's, a lot of times the blocker wants to take the defender to the same gap where the defender wants to go. And in our world, that's what we call expected. And I think that's one of those things that's difficult for not only coaches to kind of wrap their head around, but in our world, what we call expected, they might be giving, that's a plus. He did his job, where we're saying that's expected. If you're taking a guy exactly where he wants to go, that's expected on both ends. So we really have to see the game from both angles, which I think makes us a little bit more unique. And then the other part of it, someone asked about adjusting our grades and adjusting for who guys are playing against, and I have some different opinions on that. First of all, to just clarify what we do in the system, we don't say, hey, that's Barry Sanders making that move, therefore your missed tackle, we're going to give you a 0 instead of a minus because it's Barry Sanders. We try to treat everybody the same. And again, when we talk about offensive line coaches and their biases, we've sat down with them so many times and they say, I can't ask that guy to make that kind of block. That's on me. That's my fault. And we say, look, we have to grade, whoever that is, the backup who's starting this week, we have to grade him the same as we grade Joe Thomas. We can't say, well, that's fair to ask Joe Thomas to do that, and that's not fair to ask this guy to do it. We don't grade names, right? So that's one way we try to keep the biases out of it. As far as adjusting for competition, there are ways that we can do that, and we have a lot of people going through our system and maybe learning about those adjustments. Do you, if you do get two sacks against Joe Thomas or 2 pressures against Joe Thomas, does that, how much more difficult is that? Does that mean more for the future? My take on it, though, is when you do have a bad tackle, the Robert Quinn thing a couple years ago, Ben, Robert Quinn would have multiple games of 10 pressures against the Gerard Bushrods of the world. And then when he goes up against Joe Staley, he had 1 or 2 when he gets shut out. So my thought is, when you're facing Gerard Bushrod, there's a lot of value in destroying him and getting 10 pressures. You still have to win that game, and domination is valuable at the NFL level. So, and if you do get 2 pressures or 2 sacks against Joe Thomas, what does that mean? That you're going to get 15 against Gerard Bushrod? How do you adjust that? So I've always been of the mind, keep everything simple across the board. Do not adjust for competition as far as our grading goes. And then we can run some math on the side and figure out if there is more value in one thing or more predictive part, nature and, beating Joe Thomas versus beating Gerard Bushrod. So we have a team of guys kind of going through that stuff. But I think the heart of the system is let's treat all NFL players equally, and then we can adjust things after the fact.
For sure. I think it's a far more sound basis to apply a flat system, and then having applied the flat system to look for adjustments to make off the back end of that and say, okay, it's easier to get a plus grade in this scenario than it is in this scenario, or it's easier to get plus grades against this offensive tackle than that offensive tackle, than to go in with those preconceived notions, because then, on any given play, your adjustment may be off. Joe Thomas may make a mistake on a play, and suddenly he's given up an easy pressure to a defender, and you're saying, actually, that's a really difficult thing to do, and you're overcompensating for the fact that Joe Thomas has made an error on the play. It's far easier to apply it flat and say, right, that was an easier pressure, than to come in and say, oh, if you get any pressure against Joe Thomas, it's worth double.
Yeah, so I agree. And the one other thing, I know that, other people will adjust wholesale for competition and say, well, you did this against a bad defense, therefore we have to downgrade it a little bit, or you did this against a good defense, therefore we have to upgrade it a little bit. I guess my argument against that, using Matt Ryan as an example, the last couple of years, he had one game against the Bucs where he absolutely tore them apart a couple of years ago. And not only was Gerald McCoy not in the game, but it was just the worst display of zone defense I think I've ever seen at the NFL level. And he was picking apart just easy, just wide open players. And then when Gerald McCoy came back, the Bucs defense was completely different and better. And it's almost like, so if you're a Matt Ryan fan, like you're rooting for the Bucs to do better as the year progresses because it makes that Week 3 performance look better. Is that how that works? Because you're adjusting wholesale for competition. And similarly, when Matt Ryan last year took advantage of a couple coverage busts against Seattle, I mean, they were coverage busts. Seattle busting coverage is just as bad as Cleveland,
Yeah.
And if you take advantage of that, it's not more difficult because you're going up against Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman. They busted the coverage, and you took advantage with a wide open receiver. And same thing with Cleveland. If you hit a perfect pass in tight coverage against Cleveland, it's not easier because it's the Browns. It was still tight coverage. So I have some issues with that wholesale adjustment for competition. You've taken me off the rails, Ben, but I guess it's my own fault. Let's tie it up a little bit. So, you are where you are right now as far as director of analysis, continue to progress with the system. That's been fun and fantastic to watch. Anything for you that kind of wraps up your time at PFF before I ask you about your YouTube sensation video that we were watching the other day?
You've taken me completely off track. Let's get to the YouTube sensation. Me involved in PFF is just going to be the same as it's been for the last decade. It's just going to be constant improvement, trying to put people in the best situation to succeed, trying to put PFF in the best situation to succeed. Nothing about that is going to change. It's just continuing the process. As Nick Saban would say, Jack Farrell's favorite, trust the process.
Trust the process, PFF. All right, YouTube sensation, Ben Stockwell. We got some video of Ben playing football. In what league is this now, Ben? What's the name of the league?
It's a defunct league. It's been renamed, I think, about 2 or 3 times since I played in it. It was the British American Football League.
So we went through it. I graded it. I eyeballed it in my head. You were about a -10 in the old system, the old plus-minus system. I don't know what that translates to, the 0 to 100, but I saw
22.
Yeah, about 22 at tops. I mean, there was, soft at the point of attack. You weren't using your hands really well. Lost contain a couple times. Couldn't find the ball. What was your deal?
In my defense, that was my first preseason game with the Norwich Devils, and I think I'd been playing at defensive end for about 2 or 3 weeks before that. Okay. But other than that, I've got no defense because I don't think it got any better over the next 2 years.
Then if we adjust it for competition, being in the British League, I mean, that's like a minus on
minus
the
22
scale. That's a little rough. One other question, going back to 2012, big hot button issue, 2012 top 101. Does Marcel Reese of the Raiders, formerly of the Raiders, does he deserve a spot on the 2012 top 101, the PFF top 101?
Marcel Reese definitely should have been in the top 101 for 2012 because let's be honest, how many players can you see on consecutive plays lighting up Luke Kuechly on a lead block and then beating him on a post route the next play? I mean, you just don't see that every single day. So Marcel Reese definitely should have been in there, and I will believe that until my last breath.
Well, that was I told you, you've become much more political over the years. You didn't raise your voice this time. Nobody hung up on you. I mean, what a dark day in the history of PFF.
I don't think anybody hung up on that day. I do believe people just threw headsets down and walked away from the computer.
Yeah, there was some cussing. There was some screaming at each other. And it was all over Marcel Reese and his spot in the PFF top 101. So that does it with Ben Stockwell, the architect of the PFF system. And stick with us. We'll be bouncing around, going through the entire history of PFF. Ben is one of the most important figures, and we appreciate his time here. And that'll do it for today's episode. Really great stuff from Khaled and Ben. So, Sam, I have to get your take on the Marcel Reese incident. Where did you stand? Were you on Ben's side? Were you on Kay's side? Were you in the middle of all this shouting match and in the back and forth?
Oh, yeah, I was hit deep. This is, we've already covered a little bit of my contentious personality and how that tends to cause problems. I was firmly at the heart of causing this problem. I was with Ben. I was fighting for the Marcel Reese, the versatility, the ability that he had as an offensive weapon. I wanted Marcel Reese on the 101, and that caused quite the argument. That was, I think, the single biggest blow-up argument in PFF staffing history. That had legitimate flouncing off the call outcomes. It was outstanding.
It really was fantastic. It was historic, and through the years, I noticed you and Ben end up on the same side quite a bit. I think there was one time, I think you and Ben were on opposite sides. It was me and Ben against you and Kay, and it was really weird. It was just an odd situation, arguing with different people.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is because, other than Neil, me and Ben were kind of the two initial graders. Ben kind of devised the system, and then I would say he trained me, but we've already covered that he really didn't. He just told me what I was supposed to be doing, and then we kind of just went to it. So, the two of us, I think, have tended to be on the same page quite a lot, partly, I think, because of devising the system or being very close together in terms of how the system developed, but also because I think we see the game in quite a similar way. So we don't tend to disagree too much. It happens on occasions, and I'll push for things that Ben doesn't necessarily want. But yeah, we do tend to be on the same side more often than not.
And again, I think that's the beauty of what makes the entire operation tick. So that'll do it for us today. We appreciate everybody that's listening. We're setting all kinds of records here at the PFF podcast, and we're trying to give back just a little bit to all of our great listeners. So be sure to give us a 5-star review, and it is more important than ever that you do it, because if you leave that review, you'll be put into a drawing. We're going to give away a free PFF Elite membership, which is a new subscription product by PFF. It's everything you ever need. If you're an NFL fan, a fantasy player, NFL draft fan, it has everything you're looking for, even some unbelievable downloadable Excel files if you're really into that kind of stuff. So a lot of the stuff that our fans have been asking for years, we're giving it back away. It's a $200 product, and someone's going to win that for free. So leave us the 5-star review. Be sure to leave your Twitter handle or email in the review, and you'll be put into that drawing. And if you're not going to do that, we hope you will, but at least check out PFF Edge as well. Only a $40 product, but really unbelievable stuff in there. Again, fantasy, NFL, draft, and it's one of those products that's going to stay $40 forever, and we're just going to keep adding more and more value to it. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So a lot of changes this summer at PFF. Be sure to check all of that out at profootballfocus.com, and be sure to leave that review. Leave your name there so we know where to find you. And that'll do it for us today, and we hope you guys tune in next week for more of the history of PFF.